Hey there, and we're back again with Japanese internment. This time we're going to be talking about the constitutionality of Executive Order 9066 and whether Roosevelt and the federal government had the actual constitutional authority to exclude Japanese Americans from the west coast of the United States of America. So let's check it out. Yeah. Whoa, hello. Alright, Fred Korematsu. So this is a dude that you need to remember. Really awesome guy. Talk about like civil rights. This guy is at the forefront of civil rights for his time period. So Fred Korematsu was a native-born American citizen. He was a Nisei. So his parents may have been Japanese nationals and they immigrated to the United States. However, Korematsu was born here in the U.S. He went to United States schools. He learned English. He learned American history. He said the Pledge of Allegiance every day. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, blah, 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 blah. So he said that stuff. He even had American girlfriends, because as you can see, the dude was kind of a hottie. You know, he was the all-American dude. Just happened to be Japanese American, that's all. So, you know, he got a little older. He was very skilled as a welder. And so he ended up getting some pretty good jobs. However, after World War I broke out and the Japanese began to become more aggressive in their quest to create their greater East Asian co-prosperity sphere. They invaded Manchuria, they invaded China proper, they began to expand into Southeast Asia and some of the Pacific Islands and whatnot. You know, and then as part of the Tripartite Pact, which is part of the Axis powers, a lot of Americans began to discriminate against the Japanese American community. You know, and let's be honest, and this is something that I forgot to mention in the last video lecture. When we look at the treatment of Japanese Americans during World War II, it's not completely shocking. Okay, we look at the West Coast and how Asian Americans had been treated going all the way back to the Gilded Age. And here's really good synthesis, right? So going all the way back to the Gilded Age, and how you had the Irish and how they were complaining that there were so many Chinese people coming in. And then later in the early 1900s, you had complaints of all these Japanese people. So you had the Japanese, the gentleman's agreement that was made, I think it was 1907. So you had on the west coast of the United States, anti-Japanese sentiment going on for quite some time. Okay, this is not anything new. When World War II, as I mentioned earlier, when it broke out, what began to happen, especially on the West Coast, was you began to see increased discrimination of Japanese Americans throughout the region. You know, those photographs that I showed you guys with, you had the one guy with the cash register, and there was anti-Japanese slogans, and then you had the lady with the signs on her house basically telling Japanese to get out, and this is a white man's neighborhood, and whatever. This is something that you're going to see frequently on the West Coast. Fred Korematsu had commented, as well as I'm sure as many Japanese Americans, that after the war broke out, that there was a lot of discrimination that was perpetrated against them. You know, this is before Pearl Harbor. So we're looking at, for instance, like restaurants. So restaurants would start to refuse Japanese Americans, entertainment areas, you know, theaters, movies, that type of thing. Fred Korematsu, actually, he lost his job. He was removed from the union that he was part of because he was Japanese American. So again, there was a lot of Japanese American sentiment going on, and you know, to someone like Fred Korematsu, who's an American citizen, he didn't understand this, and you know, frankly, it really bothered him, and especially after Pearl Harbor, when 9066 was initiated, that he's like, hell no, I ain't gonna go to these camps, and he actually had a white girlfriend. He's like, I'm not going to leave my girlfriend. I mean, this is crazy. He and his girlfriend are going to kind of plot some type of a scheme where they're going to go to Nevada. And what Korematsu ended up doing is he ended up selling his car, and he ditched his California driver's license. And I read, and I don't know if this is verified or not, but it is kind of interesting. I read that he actually had some plastic surgery done, I guess to make him look more Caucasian. And he created a new identity, and he called himself Clyde Sarah. Clyde Sarah. Because he looks like Clyde Sarah. Well, you know, oh yes, and he also claimed that he was Spanish Hawaiian. I don't know how well that one's going to go over. So, you know, he was eventually stopped by the Popo, and I don't know if that was in California or Nevada or whatever. But he stopped by the police, and I don't know if he tried to be like, well, wait a minute, you know, I'm Spanish Hawaiian or whatever, but it doesn't fly. And he ends up gets taken to jail. He ends up in federal prison actually because he violated the order 9066. He refused to go to the camp. So he's arrested, and eventually he's sent to one of the processing centers, which was actually in Tanforan, which is, I think it's in the Bay Area somewhere. It's like one of these assembly areas like I told you about with Santa Anita Racetrack. Same type of thing. The ACLU actually tried to help him out, and then this will eventually end up going all the way to the United States Supreme Court. But while this is going on, Korematsu, after he goes to Tanforan, this assembly center, will eventually end up going to the concentration camp of Topaz. So he ends up there, and he files a lawsuit saying that his civil rights were violated as an American citizen. So he's definitely a conscientious objector. Even his family was kind of like, I don't really know, because if you remember, you know, his family are the Issei, so they are Japanese nationals, and you know, obviously they don't want to be seen as disloyal, so they didn't know quite what to think of their son Fred, or Clyde, or whatever you want to call him. But anyways, so he files a lawsuit basically saying that this is wrong, civil rights are being violated, and again, eventually it'll go to the state Supreme Court. The state said that, you know, everything was fine, so that's why he ends up going to the internment camp of Topaz. But eventually he'll appeal that, and then it'll eventually go all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And this culminates in the very, very, very important landmark case of Korematsu versus the United States in 1944. So when the court decides to hear this, and when they do eventually hear the case, this question is the main question that they have to answer, which I've brought up to you guys several times now. So did the government go beyond their constitutional war powers by implementing exclusion of Japanese Americans and restricting their rights? This is a very significant question because there's really something important that's missing from the question. So you look at the question, did the government go beyond constitutional war powers by implementing exclusion of Japanese Americans and restricting their rights? What is this only focusing on? It's only focusing on the idea of exclusion. Did the federal government have the right to say that out of military necessity, Japanese Americans cannot be, sorry about that, cannot be over here? They're excluded from this area. Okay, so because they're excluded from this area, we are going to move them over here. So they're only looking at that idea of exclusion. What is missing from this? Think about it, okay? What is the big thing? What is it that Korematsu is really saying was the issue with this? Was it the idea of exclusion? No, it's civil rights, okay? There's nothing in here talking about the idea of civil rights, and I think that is the big problem with this particular case and this particular question. So when a court case is put in front of the justices, and they got to look at that question that's put in front of them. And then you have the different sides. You're going to have the defense. Okay, the defense is going to be arguing on behalf of Korematsu. So what is the defense saying? What is the issue here? So the defense basically saying is the idea of exclusion is unconstitutional. The federal government does not have the power to do that during wartime. This is basically legalized racism. So it's a civil rights issue. Okay, so they're going to initiate this idea that it's a civil rights issue. This is more than just military necessity. Okay, this is a human rights, a civil rights issue. It goes so far beyond the idea of just putting some people from over here to over here. Okay, it goes way beyond that. That's what the defense is going to say. Now, when the court is actually listening to a particular case and deciding a case, they have to look at what is called precedents. So what comes before? Were there any cases that dealt with this particular issue? Because when the Supreme Court deals upon a particular issue, that is basically what the law is, for lack of a better term. Okay? So if you go back, there were some other cases that had already been decided that the Supreme Court can use in its decision on the Korematsu case. So one of those cases that was decided before Korematsu was the Hirabayashi case, of 1943. So one of the things that came with Executive Order 9066, not just the idea of exclusion, but also the idea of observation and curfews, that you could have the federal government, the FBI, local authorities observe and search and seize property of Japanese Americans, that Japanese Americans could only be in certain areas at certain times. They couldn't be out on the streets at particular times. So, you had all of these other things that went along with 9066, which obviously all these people are going to have some major issue with. So Gordon Hirabayashi, he was a younger guy. He actually went to, I think it was the University of Washington, if I'm not mistaken. It was either Washington or Berkeley. But he went to school, and he liked to go out, have a good time, whatever. And he decided that he wasn't going to abide by the curfews that went hand in hand with Executive Order 9066, so he kind of said, screw it. And he violated the curfew laws. So one night he was picked up for violating those curfew laws. So when this came before the courts, the federal government had, the question that they had to decide was this one right here. Did the government have the power to discriminate against Japanese Americans, or was this a violation of Fifth Amendment and due process? Is this a fair law? Was Gordon Hirabayashi was he being treated fairly under fair laws? That's the main question that comes up as part of the Fifth Amendment. So, where does the government stand in this? Do they have the right, sorry about the typo there, do they have the right to, theoretically discriminate against Japanese Americans and implement these curfew laws and subject them to observations that other Americans aren't subjected to? Well, the Supreme Court decided in the Hirabayashi case that yes, this was constitutional. And the reason for that is simply, again, it's like a military necessity argument, that it was so uncertain during this time that, are the Japanese going to invade the west coast of the United States? Are the Japanese Americans going to conspire along with the Japanese? We just don't know. So therefore, there needs to be protections of American citizens of the possibility of something like this actually happening. You have to protect against espionage and sabotage. And again, you just don't know who these Japanese Americans are. You can't pick out the loyal from the disloyal just boom, just like that. So, the court in the Hirabayashi case is going to say, in times of war, racial discrimination, it can be necessary. So this is, again, really important, because when it comes to the Korematsu case, this is already on the books. Okay, so they've already determined that in times of war, racial discrimination can be necessary, that it was constitutional to establish curfews and to subject Japanese Americans to observations that other Americans are not being subjected to. So it's going to play a huge role in the official decision of the Supreme Court in the Korematsu case. So what was the majority opinion in the Korematsu case? So the way the Supreme Court works is that you have the majority opinion, and in this case, for the Korematsu case, it was 6-3. So 6 in favor of the official decision and 3 dissenting. So you have somebody who is appointed to write the official opinion of the case. And that'll be the majority opinion. So what was the majority opinion? What was the belief set of the 6 justices who said that Korematsu should have gone to jail because he defied the order of Executive Order 9066. So the majority in the case are going to say exclusion is a necessity. And I've brought this idea up before, that these are extraordinary times and you need to act quick. I mean, look how quick Pearl Harbor was. You don't know if there's going to be an invasion of the West Coast and if it's going to be like really quick. So how can you possibly separate those people who are loyal and disloyal? So unfortunately, you have to round everybody up and you have to exclude them as a whole from that particular area. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason why they're going to say that Executive Order 9066 is constitutional is because we're all citizens of the United States, and with citizenship does come responsibility. And in wartime, in this war in particular, it was a total war, and everyone played their part, be it from, saving scrap metal and turning that in to collection centers, or joining the civil defense, or joining the military, whatever it happened to be, everyone played a role. So the court's going to say that in this particular case, again, it's an unfortunate thing, but the Japanese Americans, their role is to go to the relocation centers. Okay, it's in the best interest of themselves and also the greater American population. The next reason that they're going to say this is constitutional is this is out of military necessity. We need to protect the United States. And things are so uncertain when it comes to war that you just don't know. And because there was a great possibility that the Japanese would invade and attack the west coast of the United States, that this was something that had to happen simply out of military necessity. Okay? They're also going to bring up the race issue, and they're going to say this has nothing, zero, to do with race. This is not a racial issue. This is simply about military necessity and the fact that we have to protect all Americans. That is what trumps everything. That's the most important thing. What is going to protect the vast majority of Americans? What is going to protect them is to put Japanese Americans who we cannot discern who are loyal or disloyal into these camps. Okay, this is not a racial issue at all. It's simply about the protections of American citizens. Now, something very interesting. So Justice Black is the one who wrote the majority opinion. So one of the things that he put in the official opinion is this piece right here, that he argued that this had to happen out of military necessity, but he's not sure if it's constitutional. Okay? So it's throwing that out there. Okay, so even the majority opinion is saying this had to happen for this time period, but it may not be constitutional. okay? But because we're looking at extraordinary circumstances, this is a time of emergency and peril, it has to happen. We're just not sure if it's constitutional, though. Interesting. The dissenting opinion. So there were 3 justices who said this is a load of bull honky and this is wrong. So what were those justices' opinions in terms of why Executive Order 9066 was actually unconstitutional? What they're going to say is that what the court did is they only focused on this one idea of exclusion. They didn't look at the entire program. You know, they didn't look at the fact that Japanese Americans didn't have the right to freely assemble. They didn't have the right to practice Buddhism. They didn't have the right to bear arms. They didn't even have the right to vote. I don't think I told you guys that in the last lecture. They did not have the right to vote. They did not have the right to have counsel. They weren't brought in front of a judge. They didn't have a jury trial. You know, when you start looking at all of these things, that it adds up, you know, that all of these rights of these people are violated. Even though these rights are not absolute, these are gross violations of American citizens. And so they're going to say this is legalized racism because who's going to the camp? Who is going to the camp? Okay, it's not, again, the German Americans. It's not the Italian Americans. It's not the conscientious objectors to the war who are white Americans. No, it's Japanese Americans. Okay, even though, and I told you guys this in the last lecture, there were about 5,000 German Americans and Italian Americans that were also rounded up. There were millions of German Americans and Italian Americans in the United States. Okay, there are only about 120,000 or so Japanese Americans in the United States, and then, you know, add on that there are more Japanese nationals, you know, maybe about 200,000 or so of them. This is legalized racism, according to the dissenting justices. No one else was targeted but them. And their big thing also is, what does this mean for the future? They have major implications for the future. Can this happen again? What if you have a terrorist attack? What if you have Al-Qaeda or other terrorist groups that, ISIS, that are going to, I don't know, bomb San Dimas High School or whatever? I mean, does this mean that the federal government would have the power to round up all Muslims in the United States? Because there's a fear that all Muslims in the United States are terrorists? I kind of hesitate to say this, but this is what Donald Trump is saying. You know, he's talking about putting all Muslim Americans on some type of a list or a database in the United States, basically implying that these people, even though they're Muslim Americans, American citizens, that they have the propensity of actually perpetrating a terrorist attack against the United States. That's a problem. And one of the things about the Supreme Court when they decide on a case is it sets precedent. So as I mentioned earlier with the Hirabayashi case, when the Supreme Court decides something, that's it. They have the final say-so on what is constitutional and what's unconstitutional. And the Korematsu case it's still in the book. It's still good law, as they call it. You know, until a Supreme Court case is challenged and overturned, it's still in the books. So theoretically, by law, this could happen. I mean, I'm not saying it would, but it could. I would hope that if something like this happened again, that it would be brought in front of the Supreme Court. And even though you have the precedents of Hirabayashi and you have the precedents of Korematsu, that these things would be overturned. Okay, and we wouldn't have a situation like this happen in the future. But it is scary when you think about it. Oh, that is Fred Korematsu. He got some award. I want to say it was like the Presidential Medal of Freedom or something like that. He got that later in his life. Frank Korematsu was a civil rights advocate for the rest of his life. He actually was able to get out of Topaz, the camp that he was part of, because he was a skilled welder. And this is the hypocrisy of all of this. So they wanted to send all of the Japanese Americans to camps, yet the government is willing to use those Japanese Americans who have certain skills, like Korematsu, who was a welder. So he actually was allowed to leave the camp, and he ended up working in several steel mills to help with the war effort. I think he ended up eventually in Detroit or somewhere like that at some point in time in his life. But again, the hypocrisy of that the government's willing to allow the Japanese Americans eventually to join the military and then to work in the factories to aid in the war effort, and then they treat the rest of these people like they're some type of a terrorist or something. So, like I said, Korematsu is a civil rights advocate for the rest of his life. 1983, he really is looking for his case to be overturned. Even though he did do time in jail, he did end up, going to the internment camps and whatnot. He still, on principle, wanted his case to be overturned. So we're going to see in 1983 that Korematsu is going to go after this. And it was found that there was evidence that specifically showed that the federal government, the military, that they over-exaggerated the threat of Japanese Americans on the security of the United States. They deliberately lied, okay? Well, they over-exaggerated, like I said, okay? So the threat of the Japanese Americans was pretty minimal, but I think because of the war hysteria, the fact that the government probably wanted to be seen as being proactive or whatever, they felt out of necessity. And I think this is really what the American people wanted as well. So out of necessity, this is what the federal government felt it needed to do. So anyways, again, a lot of this information that was out there in terms of the fact that the Japanese Americans were not a huge threat, it wasn't brought before the Supreme Court. None of that was. It was basically, this is something that had to happen, this is military necessity, we can't discern the loyal from the disloyal, blah, 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 whatever. Okay? So 1983, again, this whole case is reopened, and his conviction at the state level was overturned. Again, nothing can be done about the fact that he spent time in jail and that he ended up having to go to the internment camps. But like I said, it's principle, and I think that's kind of important. And then also, he did get an official apology from, I think it was Daddy Bush, if I'm not mistaken. So George Herbert Walker Bush. And then later, we'll see that there will be an official apology that will be given by the federal government. The federal government finally decided to own up to what they had done to the Japanese Americans. So there was an official apology that was given, and this was under the Reagan administration in 1988. So was it Reagan? I'm pretty sure it was the Reagan administration. He left office in 88. So it was either Reagan or Bush, one or the other. Anyways, an official apology was given for the fact that you had at least 120,000 up to maybe 200,000 or so Japanese Americans, Japanese nationals who were put into these camps really for no reason. So an official apology was given, and then reparations were given. Each surviving member, I should say each surviving Japanese American who had to spend time in the camp were to receive a $20,000 reparations payment from the federal government. Well, I mean, you look at $20,000, it's like, it's nothing, you know? These people from 41 until the end of the war for the most part. Most of these people, they gave up their entire lives. They lost everything. They lost their businesses. They lost their homes. Some of them were separated from their families for, again, the duration of the war. $20,000 doesn't replace something like that. I mean, maybe it's a start, but in the fact we're looking at 1988. The fact of the matter is that so many of these people that spent time in these camps, they're already gone. They had died before this. So what's $20,000 going to do for those people? Nothing. It's pretty sad when you think about it. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the idea of exclusion, it's still quote-unquote good law. It's still in the books. The Supreme Court, when they decide something, that's it. So this potentially could happen again. Again, I'm not saying it will. I'm not saying that if something like this potentially happens that it'll get knocked down right away. It's hard to say, but the fact that it's still there, it's still in the books, it's sad, and it's scary. Definitely scary. Oh, that brings us to the very, very end. So I hope you guys, whoops, that wasn't supposed to happen. So let me see, can I fix that? Oh, there I am. But there's the beginning of that. Oops. Whatever. Oh, that's Karimatsu again. I don't know why I keep disappearing. Okay. Oh, there I am. That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to make myself bigger. So, that's the whole story about Japanese internment. It's a fascinating story. It's definitely a black mark, I think, on the history of the United States. I hope that this kind of sparked a little bit of interest in you guys, and hopefully you do some of your own research on it. And if you're ever in the neighborhood, if you're going to Mammoth, to stop at Manzanar and to experience what it was like for these people to live in the situation for the duration of the war, and just to put yourself in their shoes and have a little bit of empathy for another group of people. So having said that, sorry I don't have any songs for you or anything. Actually, I do have now that I'm thinking about it, I do have a piece that I'll read to you that is, I think, really good about the conditions of what it was like living at the camp. So I'll end it with this. We felt fortunate to be assigned to a room at the end of the barracks because we had just one neighbor to worry about. The partition wall separating the rooms was only 7 feet high with an opening of 4 feet at the top, so at night Mrs. Funai next door would tell when Sumi was still sitting up in bed in the dark, putting her hair up. "Ma Sumi-chan," Mrs. Funai would say through the plank wall, "are you curling your hair tonight again? Do you put it up every night?" Sumi would put her hands on her hips and glare defiantly at the wall. The block monitor, an impressive Nisei, who looked like a star tackle with his crouching walk, came around the first night to tell us that we must all be inside our room by 9 o'clock every night. At 10 o'clock, he rapped on the door again, yelling, "Lights out!" And Mother rushed to turn the light off not a second later. Throughout the barracks, there were a medley of creaking cots, whimpering infants, and explosive night coughs. Our attention was riveted on the intense little wood stove which glowed so violently, I feared it would melt right down to the floor. We soon learned that this condition lasted for only a short time, after which it suddenly turned into a deep freeze. Henry and Father took turns at the stove to produce the harrowing blast, which all but singed our army blankets, but did not penetrate through them. As it grew quieter in the barracks, I could hear the light patter of rain. Soon I felt the splat, splat of raindrops digging holes into my face. The dampness of my pillow spread like a mortal bleeding, and I finally had to get out and haul my cot toward the center of the room. In a short while, Henry was up. "I've got multiple leaks, too. Have to complain to the landlord first thing in the morning." All through the night, I heard people getting up, dragging cots around. I stared at our little window, unable to sleep. I was glad Mother had put up a makeshift curtain on the window, for I noticed a powerful beam of light sweeping across it every few seconds. The lights came from high towers placed around the camp, where guards with Tommy guns, those are machine guns, kept a 24-hour vigil. I remember the wire fence encircling us, and a knot of anger tightened in my breast. What was I doing behind a fence like a criminal? If there were accusations to be made, why hadn't I been given a fair trial? Maybe I wasn't considered an American anymore. My citizenship, it wasn't real, after all. Then what was I? I was certainly not a citizen of Japan, as my parents were. On second thought, even father and mother were more alien residents of the United States than Japanese nationals, for they had little tie with their mother country. In the 25 years that in America, they had worked and paid their taxes to their adopted government as any other citizen. Of one thing I was sure: the wire fence was real. I no longer had the right to walk out of it. It was because I had Japanese ancestors. It was also because some people had little faith in the ideas and the ideals of democracy. They said that after all these were but words and could not possibly ensure loyalty. New laws and camps were sure devices. I finally buried my face in my pillow to wipe out burning thoughts and snatch what little sleep I could. That was by Monica Itoy Sonye, someone who spent time in the relocation camps. So we'll leave it at that. Have a fantastic night, evening, day, good night, and good luck.